The notification sound had become part of my heartbeat. 3 a.m. and my phone was buzzing on the nightstand. Another ride request. I'd been asleep for maybe 40 minutes. My name is Marcus Webb, and for 2 years, I lived inside my car more than I lived in my apartment. I was what they call an independent contractor. What that really meant was I had all the responsibilities of an employee with none of the protections. I drove for Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash simultaneously, sometimes switching between all 3 apps in a single hour, chasing whatever algorithm decided to pay me the most that minute. They sold me a dream. Be your own boss. Work whenever you want. Make great money. What they didn't tell me was that I'd be making less than minimum wage once I factored in the costs they didn't cover. They didn't mention that I'd destroy my car, my health, and nearly my life in the process. And they definitely didn't tell me that when I needed them most, when I was lying in a hospital bed after an accident, they'd tell me I was on my own. This is the story of how I fell for the gig economy trap, and how millions of Americans are stuck in it right. Lot of people. I lost my job. I'd been working as an assistant manager at a retail store in Sacramento for 6 years. Decent pay, health insurance, paid time off. Nothing fancy, but it was stable. Then the company announced they were closing half their locations. Mine was one of them. Just like that, I joined the ranks of the unemployed. I sent out resumes for weeks, months. The responses were always the same. Overqualified, underqualified. We're going in a different direction. We've decided to pursue other candidates. My savings started evaporating. Rent was $1,500 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that wasn't even that nice. I had a car payment, student loans, credit card debt from when I was younger and dumber. The math wasn't working. That's when I saw the ads. They were everywhere. Make money driving with Uber. Be a dasher. Drive with Lyft and earn on your own terms. The promotional materials made it look easy. One ad showed a guy picking up his daughter from soccer practice during the day, then doing a few rides at night, smiling the whole time. Another showed a woman who claimed she made $2,000 a week. The message was clear. Flexibility, freedom, and good money. I signed up for all of them in one night. The approval process was fast. Too fast, looking back. Background check. Proof of insurance, registration. And I was in. Within 72 hours, I was accepting my first ride. A notification popped up. Marcus, you've got a ride request. Pick up in 8 minutes. I remember feeling excited. This was it. This was how I'd bridge the gap until I found a real job. This was temporary. That was March 2019. I kept telling myself it was temporary for the next 2 years. The first week, I made about $400. I thought that wasn't bad for a week of driving in my spare time. Maybe 25 hours total. Then I did the math. $400 for 25 hours is $16 an hour. Not great, but not terrible. Except that wasn't a real number. I'd driven about 600 miles that week. My car gets about 25 miles per gallon. Gas was around $3.50 a gallon back then. So that's 24 gallons of gas. About $84. The iOS standard mileage rate that year was 58 cents per mile, which is meant to account for gas, maintenance, insurance, and depreciation. 600 miles times 58 cents is $348 in actual costs. So really, I'd made $52 for 25 hours of work. That's $2.08 an hour. But I didn't understand it yet. I just saw the $400 in my account and thought, if I work more hours, I'll make more money. So I started driving more. And more. And more. Within a month, I was driving 60 hours a week. Within 2 months, I was regularly hitting 70, sometimes 80 hours. I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to catch the airport runs. I'd drive through the morning rush hour. I'd take a break around 10, try to sleep for a few hours. Then I'd be back out for the lunch rush. Afternoons were slower, but I'd stay online, waiting for requests. Then came the evening commute, the dinner rush, and finally, the bar close crowd. Friday and Saturday nights. I wouldn't stop until 3 or 4 a.m. Drunk people paid surge prices. And surge prices were the only way to make the math work even a little bit. I was living on energy drinks, gas station hot dogs, and maybe 4 hours of sleep a night. My apartment became just a place to shower and change clothes. Everything else happened in my car. My 2015 Honda Civic became my office, my dining room, and sometimes my bedroom. I kept a toothbrush in the glove compartment. I had changes of clothes in the trunk. I learned which parking lots had the cleanest bathrooms and which gas stations didn't care if you parked there for a couple hours to nap. The apps became my supervisors. They told me where to go, what to do, and how much I'd earn. Except they weren't really supervisors, because I was an independent contractor. I had no boss. I was my own boss. That's what they kept saying anyway. Here's what they don't show you in the promotional videos. Every mile you drive wears down your car. Tires, brakes, oil changes, transmission, engine components. Your car isn't designed to be driven 70 hours a week through city traffic, making constant stops and starts, idling in parking lots. My first major expense hit for months in. Brake pads and rotors, $800. I'd been driving so much that I'd completely worn through them. The mechanic told me he usually sees this kind of wear after 50,000 miles. I'd put on 30,000 in 4 months. Then it was tires. Then an oil change every month instead of every 3 months. Then the check engine light came on, and that was $1,200 for a new catalytic converter. I was making about $2,500 a month in gross earnings by this point, working 70-hour weeks. But after gas, maintenance, and the car payment, I was taking home maybe $1,400. And I still had to pay taxes on the full amount at the end of the year because I was an independent contractor. $1,400 a month for 70-hour weeks. That's about $5 an hour. But I was trapped. I couldn't afford to stop driving because I needed the money. But the more I drove, the more my car deteriorated, which meant more expenses, which meant I had to drive more to cover those expenses. It was a treadmill that only moved faster. One thing I learned quickly. You're not really your own boss when an algorithm controls everything you do. Uber and Lyft use dynamic pricing. They call it surge pricing. What it means is that when demand is high, prices go up. Sounds fair, right? Except the apps don't tell you where the surge is going to be or when it's going to end. You're just chasing heat maps on your phone. Driving to neighborhoods where the ABB says you might make more money. Sometimes you drive 15 minutes to a surge zone, and by the time you got there, it was gone. No rides, no surge, and you just wasted gas and time. DoorDash was even worse. They had this thing where they'd show you an offer. Deliver this food for $8, seems okay, except the restaurant is 3 miles away, and the customer is 7 miles from the restaurant. That's 10 miles total, in traffic, for $8. And if you decline too many offers, the algorithm punishes you by giving you worse offers. They gamified everything. Acceptance rates, completion rates, ratings. If your acceptance rate dropped below 85% on DoorDash, you'd get locked out of being able to schedule blocks of time. If your O rating dropped below a certain threshold, you could be deactivated. But you're an independent contractor, so you can choose which jobs to accept, right? Except if you actually exercise that choice, you get punished. One driver I met told me he'd been deactivated from Uber after a passenger falsely accused him of being drunk. No investigation, no appeal, just an email. Your account has been deactivated. He'd been driving for 3 years, had a 4.9 star rating, and he lost his income in 1 second because of an algorithm. The apps also started manipulating how much they showed you. In the beginning, you could see the full fare for a ride before accepting it. Then Uber changed it so you'd only see the pickup location and the passenger rating. You wouldn't know if you were driving someone 3 miles or 30 miles until you picked them up. They called it improving the rider experience. What it really meant was they could trick drivers into accepting unprofitable rides. I accepted a ride once that showed a pickup 8 minutes away. Seemed fine. I picked up the passenger, and the destination was 43 miles away, deep into the suburbs. The fare was $32. 43 miles at 58 cents per mile is about $25 in costs. I made $7 for 90 minutes of work, and then I had to drive 43 miles back to the city with no passenger, which meant I made $0 on the return trip. I lost money on that ride. But if I declined it, my acceptance rate would drop. You weren't driving for Uber. Uber was driving you. December 2020, a Thursday night. Around 11 p.m. I'd been driving for 14 hours straight. I'd started at 6 a.m., done the morning rush, powered through the day, and I was trying to make it to midnight because the late-night bar crowd would start soon. I was exhausted. I'd had 3 energy drinks and a gas station sandwich that had been sitting in my passenger seat since 4 p.m. My eyes were burning. But I had a passenger in the back seat, and I was taking her home from a restaurant downtown. I was on Interstate 80, heading west. The road was dark. There was construction on the right lane, so everyone was merging left. I checked my mirror, signaled, started to move over. I didn't see the truck. He must have been in my blind spot, Or maybe I was too tired to check properly. He was going faster than I thought. His horn blared. I swerved back right, overcorrected, and my car spun out. Everything went into slow motion. I remember seeing headlights. I remember the passenger screaming. I remember the sound of metal crunching, glass shattering, airbags exploding. Then silence. I came to maybe 30 seconds. Later, my head was ringing. There was blood on my face from a cut above my eyebrow. The windshield was cracked. The passenger was crying, but seemed okay. My car was totaled, sitting half in the construction zone, half on the shoulder. The truck that hit me had stopped. Other cars were pulling over. Someone called 911. The ambulance came. So did the police. They took statements, checked everyone for injuries. The passenger had some bruising from the seatbelt, but nothing serious. I had a concussion, the cut, and some whiplash. The truck driver was fine. The police report listed me as at fault for unsafe lane change. I got taken to the hospital. They ran tests, stitched up my forehead, gave me a prescription for pain medication, and sent me home with instructions to rest for at least a week. I didn't have a car anymore. I didn't have health insurance. And I definitely didn't have a week's worth of savings to cover not working. The hospital bill was $8,000. I had to pay it out of pocket. That's when I learned what independent contractor really means. I called Uber to file a claim. I explained what happened. The representative was polite but firm. Since I was an independent contractor, I wasn't covered by Uber's insurance unless the accident happened with a passenger in the car and was the other driver's fault. But I had a passenger, I said. Yes, but the police report indicates you were at fault. So what am I supposed to do? You'll need to file a claim with your personal insurance. Here's the problem with that. When you drive for Uber or Lyft, you're supposed to have commercial insurance or a rideshare endorsement on your personal policy. Commercial insurance costs about 3 times as much as personal insurance. I couldn't afford it, so I'd been driving on my regular personal auto insurance, which explicitly doesn't cover you when you're using your car for commercial purposes. If I filed a claim, they'd investigate, see I was driving for Uber, and deny the claim. Or worse, they'd cancel my policy entirely. I was stuck. I couldn't work because I didn't have a car. I couldn't get another car because I didn't have savings. I couldn't pay my bills because I wasn't working. And I had an $8,000 hospital bill and a totaled car. I called Uber again, asking if there was any kind of assistance program, anything they could do. The representative said there wasn't. I was an independent contractor. I was responsible for my own insurance, my own vehicle, my own everything. But I was working for you when this happened, I said. You were working through our platform, she corrected. There's a distinction. That distinction meant I had nothing. No workers' compensation, no disability pay, no health insurance, no safety net. I'd been driving 70-hour weeks for this company for almost 2 years, and when I needed them, they reminded me that I'd never actually worked for them at all. While I was trying to figure out how to survive without a car or an income, there was a massive fight happening in California over this exact issue. In 2019, California passed a law called AB 5. The law was designed to reclassify gig workers as employees instead of independent contractors. If it went into effect, Uber and Lyft drivers would get minimum wage, overtime pay, sick leave, unemployment insurance, and workers' compensation. The gig companies lost their minds. Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, and Postmates spent over $200 million on a campaign to get a ballot measure passed that would exempt them from AB 5. They called it Proposition 22. $200 million. That's more than has ever been spent on a ballot measure in American history. They flooded the airwaves with ads. They sent messages through the apps to drivers and customers. The messaging was slick. Protect driver flexibility. Vote yes on Prop 22. They made it sound like if Prop 22 didn't pass, drivers would lose the ability to choose their own hours. They claimed that reclassifying drivers as employees would destroy the gig economy. What they didn't say was that companies like Uber have never been profitable. Their entire business model depends on not having to pay minimum wage, benefits, or payroll taxes. If they had to classify drivers as employees, they'd have to completely restructure how they operate. They spent $200 million to avoid doing that, and it worked. In November 2020, Prop 22 passed with 58% of the vote. I voted against it. A lot of drivers I knew voted for it because they believed the ads. They thought they were protecting their flexibility. What they actually did was lock themselves into a system where they have no protections and no power. After Prop 22 passed, Uber's stock price went up. Tony West, Uber's chief legal officer, called it a future of work model. They started lobbying other states to pass similar laws. The companies won, the drivers lost, and I was still sitting in my apartment with no car, no income, and a stack of medical bills. Let me break down the real economics of gig work for you, because the companies sure as hell won't. In 2020, a study by the Economic Policy Institute found that Uber drivers make an average of $9.37 per hour after expenses. That's well below minimum wage in most states. The companies dispute this, of course. They'll point to their own studies that claim drivers make $20-something an hour. But those studies only count engaged time, the time when you have a passenger or a food order in your car. They don't count the time you spend waiting for requests, driving to pickups, or returning from drop-offs. If you count all the time you're logged into the app, working, the real number is much lower. Here's another number. Uber and Lyft have never made a profit. Not once. Uber lost $8 billion in 2019. Lyft lost nearly $3 billion. How do you lose billions of dollars while paying your workers less than minimum wage? The answer is that they're not trying to make money right now. They're trying to dominate the market, drive out competitors, and eventually replace human drivers with self-driving cars. They've been funding this expansion with investor money, burning through billions, operating at a loss. And who pays for that? The drivers. We subsidize their business model with our cars, our gas, our time, and our health. Meanwhile, the executives get rich. Uber's former CEO, Travis Kalanick, sold off about $2.5 billion in stock. Lyft's founders made hundreds of millions when the company went public. The wealth flows up. The risk flows down. After Prop 22 passed in California, the gig companies took their playbook nationwide. They started lobbying in Massachusetts, New York, Illinois, Washington. The goal was to pass Prop 22 style laws in every state before anyone could classify gig workers as employees. In 2021, Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash formed a coalition and hired some of the most expensive lobbyists in Washington. They spent millions pushing a federal law that would create a new classification of worker, not quite an employee, not quite an independent contractor, something in between that would give workers some minor benefits while still exempting the companies from payroll taxes and most labor protections. They call it portable benefits. What it really means is you might get a small healthcare stipend, but you still don't get minimum wage, overtime, sick leave, unemployment insurance, or the right to unionize. It's a con, and it's working. In state after state, legislators who receive campaign donations from gig companies are introducing these bills. The companies have created front groups with friendly names like Protect ABP-based drivers and services that run ads claiming they're fighting for workers. They're not. They're fighting for their shareholders. The real tell is what happened when Seattle tried to allow gig workers to unionize. Uber and Lyft immediately sued, arguing that allowing drivers to collectively bargain would violate antitrust laws because we're independent contractors, not employees. Think about that logic. We're independent contractors when they don't want to pay us benefits, but we can't act as independent contractors and negotiate our rates collectively because that would be price fixing. We're only independent when it benefits them. I'm not the only one. There are millions of gig workers in America, and most of them have stories like mine. I met a woman named Sandra who drove for Lyft in Los Angeles. She was a single mother with 2 kids. She'd been driving for 3 years, 60 hours a week, trying to keep her family fed. One night, a drunk passenger vomited in her car. She had to stop working for 2 days to get it professionally cleaned. Cost her $300 and 2 days of income. Lyft's cleaning fee reimbursement? $80. I met a guy named James who did DoorDash full-time in Chicago. He crashed his bike making a delivery during a snowstorm. Broke his collarbone. No health insurance. Couldn't work for 6 weeks. Lost his apartment. There's a driver in New York who was sexually assaulted by a passenger. She reported it to Uber. They deactivated her account while they investigated. She couldn't work for 3 weeks. When they finally reactivated her, there was no follow-up, no counseling, no support. Just an email saying she could start driving again. These companies built their empires on our backs, and when we break, they replace us with the next desperate person who needs money. After the accident, I couldn't drive anymore even if I'd wanted to. No car, no license for a while because of the medical restrictions. No money to get back on the road. I applied for unemployment. Denied. Independent contractors don't qualify unless they've been paying into the system separately, which I hadn't been because I didn't know I was supposed to. I applied for food stamps. That helped a little, but it wasn't enough to cover rent. I borrowed money from family, maxed out my credit cards, sold everything I could sell. Eventually, I had to move out of my apartment and crash on a friend's couch. A 34-year-old man sleeping in someone's living room because I'd worked myself into the ground for a company that didn't care if I lived or died. I finally found a job in early 2021. Warehouse work, 10-hour shifts, minimum wage. It was grueling, but at least I had health insurance. At least I had workers' compensation. At least when I showed up and did my job, I got paid a predictable amount. The gig economy had promised me freedom and flexibility. What it gave me was poverty, exhaustion, and debt. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night. This isn't just about rideshare drivers. The gig economy is spreading into every industry. Amazon delivery drivers are contractors. Home health aides are contractors. Even some truckers are being reclassified as contractors. Companies have figured out that if they can call you an independent contractor instead of an employee, they can cut their labor costs by 30 to 40%. No payroll taxes, no benefits, no overtime, no liability. It's the race to the bottom, and it's accelerating. Right now, there are about 57 million gig workers in America. By 2027, the number is projected to hit 86 million, more than half the workforce. Imagine a future where most jobs don't come with health insurance, sick leave, or retirement benefits, where you're always one accident, one algorithm change, one bad review away from losing your income. That's not a hypothetical future. That's the present for millions of Americans. And if companies like Uber get their way, it'll be the future for millions more. I'm not saying the gig economy shouldn't exist. There's value in flexibility. There are people who genuinely want to work a few hours here and there on their own terms. But there's a difference between flexibility and exploitation. If you work 40, 50, 60 hours a week for a company, you're not doing gig work. You're doing full-time work without full-time protections. That's not innovation. That's just old-fashioned labor exploitation dressed up in an app. Here's what needs to happen. First, we need a real classification test. If a company controls when you work, how you work, what you can charge, and whether you can work at all, you're not an independent contractor. You're an employee. It doesn't matter if they call it an algorithm or a manager. Second, we need portable benefits that actually work. If someone is doing gig work across multiple platforms, there should be a system where all those companies pay into a fund that provides health insurance, retirement benefits, and paid leave, not some watered-down version that's just for show. Third, we need to enforce minimum wage for all hours worked, not just engaged time. If you're logged into the app, waiting for work, that's working time. It should count. Fourth, we need real worker protections. The right to appeal deactivations, protection from arbitrary algorithm changes, the right to organize and collectively bargain. And fifth, we need real accountability. When a driver gets hurt on the job, the company should be responsible. When a driver gets sexually assaulted by a passenger, the company should be responsible. You can't take all the profit and none of the responsibility. But none of this will happen unless we fight for it. The gig companies have billions of dollars to spend on lobbying and propaganda. They'll tell you that worker protections will destroy jobs, kill innovation, ruin the economy. They said the same thing about the minimum wage, about overtime laws, about child labor protections. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now. It's been almost 5 years since I started driving for Uber. 4 years since the accident. I'm doing better now. I have a stable job, health insurance, a small apartment. I still have debt from those 2 years, but I'm chipping away at it. I don't drive for the apps anymore. I can't look at those logos without feeling a knot in my stomach. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never signed up, if I'd taken a minimum wage job right away instead of chasing the promise of being my end boss. I probably would have been better off financially. I definitely would have been better off physically and mentally. But I also know that I didn't really have a choice. When you're desperate, when you have bills to pay and no job prospects, you take what you can get. The gig companies know this. They're counting on it. They're not offering opportunity. They're exploiting desperation. I drove for over 70 hours a week and couldn't pay my bills. But the problem isn't that I didn't work hard enough. I worked harder than I've ever worked in my life. The problem is a system that allows corporations to profit by pushing all the costs and risks onto workers while keeping all the rewards for themselves. The problem is a regulatory environment that lets companies call employees independent contractors to dodge labor laws that took a century to build. The problem is that we've been sold a lie about the future of work, and too many people are suffering because of it. Uber is now worth over $70 billion. DoorDash is worth over $30 billion. Lyft is worth over $14 billion. I am worth about negative 20,000 when you account for my debt. That's the gig economy in a nutshell. You can work yourself to exhaustion, destroy your car, risk your health, and give up every waking hour to these apps. And at the end of it, you will have nothing but worn-out brake pads and a hospital bill. Meanwhile, the executives will cash out their stock options and lobby to make sure the next generation of workers has even fewer protections than you did. This isn't the future of work. This is the past of work, rebranded with an APP. And unless we do something about it, it's only going to get worse. My name is Marcus Webb. I was a gig worker, and I'm here to tell you, the system is broken, and it's designed that way. The only question is whether we're going to fix it or let it swallow the American workforce whole.